Welcome to the all-new Hoop Nova, your ultimate source for everything basketball.
Does Kevin Durant have a point?
No, he does not.
People aren't still talking about your decision to go to the Warriors in 2016. But he's like haunted by this.
He's never viewed it as a compliment to his skill set,
right.
And it still bothers me.
There's one thing about Kevin Durant that I will probably never understand. Every few months, he says something about his former teammates that somehow makes his own career look less impressive. And this time, he may have gone further than ever. Kevin Durant recently gave his honest opinion on the new-look Philadelphia 76ers, and at first, his answer sounded completely normal. In fact, it made perfect sense. Philadelphia has Joel Embiid, a former MVP. Tyrese Maxey is coming off an all-star level season. Jaylen Brown is a finals MVP. And the roster is loaded with players capable of putting up big numbers. So when Durant was asked whether the Sixers could be contenders, he basically said, absolutely. Fair enough. But then someone online compared Philadelphia to the Warriors team Durant played on. And that's when things got interesting. Instead of simply saying the Warriors were better, Durant started comparing the individual accomplishments of both rosters. He pointed out that Joel Embiid had won an MVP. Jaylen Brown had recently won Finals MVP. Tyrese Maxey had been an All-Star multiple times. Then he turned toward his former Warriors teammates. Klay Thompson. Durant pointed out that Klay was never an MVP candidate and averaged around 22 points per game. Draymond Green. 14 points, 7 rebounds, and 6 assists. And Steph Curry. Durant essentially treated Steph's MVP history as comparable to Embiid's. That last part is where this argument becomes incredibly difficult to understand. Because this wasn't just some random Warriors team. This was one of the greatest teams basketball has ever seen. Steph Curry wasn't simply an MVP. He was the first and only unanimous MVP in NBA history. That Warriors team won 67 games during the regular season and then went 16-1 through the playoffs. They swept 3 consecutive series on their way to the finals. And in the finals, Kevin Durant himself averaged roughly 35 points per game and won Finals MVP. Think about that for a second. Durant is one of the biggest reasons that team became so dominant. And yet, years later, he's seemingly arguing that the roster wasn't as impressive as Philadelphia's current group. That's what makes his comments so fascinating. Because Durant isn't necessarily insulting the Sixers. He's actually doing the opposite. He's building them up by pointing toward their accomplishments. The strange part is that, while doing that, he appears to be minimizing what his own Warriors teammates accomplished. And that raises a bigger question. Why does Kevin Durant keep doing this? This isn't the first time. We've seen similar situations before, especially whenever conversations about his time in Golden State come back around. Durant has always been extremely direct online. At 37 years old, he's already a 2-time NBA champion, a 2-time Finals MVP, a former MVP, and one of the greatest scorers the league has ever produced. He doesn't need to prove anything. But sometimes, it feels like Durant is still trying to prove that his championships in Golden State weren't as easy as people believe. And ironically, the more he tries to explain it, the more attention he brings back to the same debate. Were those Warriors unbeatable because of Steph, Klay, and Draymond? Or did Durant make them completely unstoppable? The answer is probably somewhere in the middle. And to be fair, Philadelphia really is loaded. Maxey was an all-star and one of the league's most productive scorers. Jaylen Brown is a proven playoff performer and Finals MVP. Embiid, when healthy, is one of the most dominant big men in basketball. On paper, there is a legitimate argument that Philadelphia could become an elite team. But comparing that roster to the 2016-17 Warriors is an entirely different conversation. That Warriors team didn't just have talented players. They had historic production, elite defense, chemistry, experience, and arguably the greatest shooting backcourt ever assembled. And then they added Kevin Durant. That's the part that makes Durant's latest comments so interesting. Because when he minimizes that Warriors team, he's not only minimizing Steph, Klay, and Draymond. He's also minimizing the environment in which he won to championships and to Finals MVP awards. Maybe Durant genuinely believes Philadelphia has more individual talent. Maybe he's simply giving credit to the players he respects. Or maybe, once again, He's responding to the internet and accidentally creating a much bigger debate than he intended. But one thing is certain, whenever Kevin Durant talks about the Warriors, people are going to listen. And after these comments, that debate isn't going away anytime soon. On paper, Kevin Durant actually had a legitimate argument. Joel Embiid is a former MVP, Jaylen Brown is a recent Finals MVP, and Tyrese Maxey has become one of the league's most dangerous scorers. Maxey averaged 28.3 points, 6.9 assists, and 5.1 rebounds while playing 71 games, finishing 6th in MVP voting. So yes, the Philadelphia 76ers have serious talent. But the problem with Durant's argument comes down to one word: recently. Embiid's MVP came during the 2020-23 season, 3 years ago, and since then his availability has become a major question. Brown's Finals MVP came in 2024, but that award came in a completely different situation and role. Then Durant compared Steph Curry to Embiid by saying Steph was simply an MVP just like Joel, but that comparison leaves out one enormous detail. Curry won his MVP immediately before Durant arrived in Golden State. And he didn't just win it, he became the first unanimous MVP in NBA history. That Warriors team also won 67 games and dominated the playoffs, going 16-1 on the way to a championship. So when Durant reduces Steph to simply an MVP, he's technically correct, but he's leaving out the part that makes Steph's achievement historic. And then things get even stranger when you look at how Durant described Draymond Green. Instead of mentioning Defensive Player of the Year, All-Defensive First Team, or All-NBA honors, Durant basically reduced Draymond to 14 points, 7 rebounds, and 6 assists. Those numbers are real, but they tell almost nothing about Draymond's actual impact. In that exact season Durant was talking about, Draymond was arguably the best defensive player in the entire NBA. He was the engine of Golden State's defense, a playmaker, a rebounder, and one of the smartest players on the floor. But if you only count scoring, all of that disappears. The same thing happened with Klay Thompson. Durant pointed out that Klay was never an MVP candidate and averaged around 22 points per game. Again, technically true but incredibly misleading. Klay received MVP votes during his career, and 22.3 points was his career high at the time. More importantly, he was one of the greatest shooting guards and perimeter shooters basketball had ever seen. Klay himself seemed to recognize exactly what Durant was doing. He posted Durant's comments on his Instagram story and jokingly asked, "Hey man, you good? What are you using my full government for?" That response perfectly captured the mood. Nobody seemed furious. It was almost funny. But Draymond Green may have explained Durant's mindset better than anyone. He said Durant was simply giving Philadelphia its respect and pointed out that Durant views basketball through a very simple lens: buckets. And that might be the entire explanation. If scoring is the first thing you value, then Draymond becomes 14 points per game, Klay becomes 22 points per game, and Steph becomes just another MVP. But basketball isn't that simple. Championships are built on defense, chemistry, playmaking, shooting, leadership, and the things that don't always appear in a box score. And that's why Durant's comments created such a massive debate. He may have been defending Philadelphia, but in the process, he accidentally made one of the greatest teams he ever played on look ordinary. And this is where the story gets even more complicated, because Draymond Green may actually be taking the high road for a reason. The Warriors are desperate for another championship caliber piece, and if Kevin Durant ever wanted to come back to Golden State, they would probably welcome him with open arms. So Draymond has very little reason to publicly attack KD or make the situation worse. But there is another part of this entire debate that people keep getting wrong. Everyone wants to compare Kevin Durant joining the Warriors to LeBron James joining Philadelphia, as if these were basically the same move. They weren't. Not even close. And the timeline makes that incredibly obvious. In July 2016, Kevin Durant was 27 years old and entering the absolute prime of his career. He was coming off a top 5 MVP finish and had just played in one of the most dramatic playoff series of his career. Then he signed a 2-year, $54.3 million max contract with Golden State, a team that had just gone 73-9, the best regular season record in NBA history at the time. But here's the part that made the decision so controversial. Golden State had just eliminated Durant and Oklahoma City. The Thunder had taken a 3-1 lead over the Warriors in the Western Conference Finals. Durant averaged around 30 points per game in that series, but Golden State stormed back and won 3 straight games to eliminate him. Just 2 months later, Durant joined the team that had knocked him out. That's why people viewed the move so differently. Now compare that with LeBron James in 2026. LeBron is 41 years old, entering his 24th NBA season, and instead of taking a massive contract in his prime, he's taking a veteran minimum deal worth only a tiny fraction of the salary cap. And the team he's joining isn't coming off a 73-win season. They aren't the overwhelming favorite to win the championship. In fact, they were recently swept out of the playoffs. That's the key difference. Durant left Oklahoma City in his prime to join the most dominant regular season team in basketball history immediately after they had defeated him. LeBron is doing it at 41, on a minimum contract, trying to add whatever he can to an already competitive roster. You can debate whether either decision was good or bad, but pretending they're identical moves doesn't really hold up. If you want to compare LeBron's Philadelphia move to something from his own career, the Miami Heat decision is probably a much closer comparison because he was still in his prime and was actively forming a super team. But even then, the circumstances weren't exactly the same. And there's another reason Durant's Golden State decision became possible in the first place. During that Western Conference Finals series, Draymond Green and Durant had their infamous on-court confrontation, and the relationship between Green and Durant became a major storyline afterward. Some people believe that entire situation helped create the tension that eventually contributed to Durant leaving Oklahoma City and joining Golden State. Whether you agree with that or not, the timeline is fascinating. Even the betting markets showed how different the situations were. Philadelphia reportedly entered the offseason as a long-shot championship team, but after acquiring Jaylen Brown and later adding LeBron, their odds improved dramatically. Golden State, meanwhile, was already viewed as the overwhelming favorite before Durant even signed. Vegas basically told us everything we needed to know. The Warriors didn't need Durant to become contenders. They were already historically dominant. They added him anyway. And this isn't even the first time Durant has tried to explain why he left Oklahoma City. Shortly after winning his first championship and Finals MVP in 2017, someone on Twitter asked him to name one legitimate reason for leaving the Thunder other than chasing a ring. Durant responded from his verified account, even writing about himself in the third person, arguing that he didn't like the organization, didn't enjoy playing for Billy Donovan, and didn't believe the roster was good enough outside of himself and Russell Westbrook. He deleted the response shortly afterward, but screenshots had already spread everywhere. 2 days later, Durant addressed the controversy publicly at a technology conference in San Francisco, and what he apologized for is extremely revealing. He didn't say he regretted defending himself. He said he regretted bringing up his former coach and organization. He called the move childish and idiotic and even personally apologized to Billy Donovan. Now bring that back to Klay Thompson's latest response. What are you using my full government for? It's funny on the surface, but it also perfectly captures the bigger issue. Durant may believe he's simply defending his basketball opinions, but every time he revisits his past, he reopens the same debate. Was Golden State proof that Durant needed a super team? Or was Durant the final piece that made an already great team completely unstoppable? And judging by the reaction to his latest comments, that debate is nowhere near finished. And this is where the entire Kevin Durant story starts to feel like a pattern. Same person, same trigger, same reaction. Back in 2017, Durant responded to criticism online, realized he had gone too far, and eventually apologized for it. Years later, the same kind of situation happened again, only this time the controversy involved alleged burner accounts. During All-Star Weekend, messages from a group chat connected to a Twitter account that many people believed belonged to Durant were leaked. Now, to be completely fair, there has never been conclusive proof that those messages were actually written by Kevin Durant, and that distinction matters. Durant himself refused to get dragged into the Twitter controversy when reporters asked him about it, saying he wasn't interested in discussing Twitter nonsense. But his history with burner accounts has made the situation much harder for people to ignore. Durant has openly admitted in the past that he used burner accounts to interact with different online communities, and he even joked about still having burners. So whether the leaked account was actually his or not, the bigger story is that Durant has never really separated himself from the idea of fighting back against people online. And when you look at the timeline, it's almost impossible not to notice the pattern. In 2017, he accidentally got into an argument with strangers online and apologized publicly. Then came years of rumors and accusations surrounding burner accounts. And now, in 2026, he's responding directly under his real name to random people who don't have anywhere near his platform. That's what makes this situation so strange. Kevin Durant is one of the most accomplished players in basketball history. He has championships, finals MVPs, an MVP award, scoring titles, and a Hall of Fame resume. He doesn't need to win arguments with strangers on social media. But to be fair, Durant does have a legitimate point when he defends his latest comments. He says the question was simply whether Philadelphia could be a contender, and he never actually claimed the Sixers were better than the Warriors. He was simply pointing out how much talent Philadelphia has. And there's another part of his argument that deserves attention. Durant pointed out the double standard surrounding super teams. When he was playing in Phoenix alongside Devin Booker and Bradley Beal, the expectation was immediately championship or failure. Every loss became evidence that the experiment wasn't working. Every playoff series carried enormous pressure. But now Philadelphia has a roster loaded with recognizable names, and people are much more comfortable calling them contenders without immediately demanding a championship. On that specific point, Durant has a case. But if we're looking for the closest comparison, Phoenix probably isn't the best one. The Brooklyn Nets are a much better example. Remember that roster. Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden were all together, and suddenly the team looked like the Avengers. Then the Nets kept adding recognizable veterans. Blake Griffin became available. Bring him in. LaMarcus Aldridge wanted another opportunity. Bring him in. The names kept piling up, and for a brief period, the Nets looked absolutely terrifying. But talent on paper doesn't automatically become championship chemistry on the court. Injuries, availability, and timing ultimately prevented that team from reaching its full potential. And that's why Philadelphia still deserves respect, especially when you consider Joel Embiid's individual resume. Embiid is a former MVP who has played through serious injuries and continued competing at an extremely high level. Even when Philadelphia's season was ending, he was still producing. But here's where Durant's entire argument comes full circle. Remember the phrase he used. Joel Embiid was an MVP recently. That's the foundation of his comparison. And that is exactly why people pushed back. Embiid is absolutely an elite player, but his MVP came several years ago, and Philadelphia still hasn't reached the conference finals during his era. Meanwhile, the Warriors team Durant joined featured a unanimous MVP, a Defensive Player of the Year, an elite two-way shooter in Klay Thompson, and a roster that had already won 73 games before Durant arrived. So no, I don't think Durant genuinely believes Draymond Green was just a 14-point scorer. I don't think he believes Klay Thompson was insignificant. And I don't think he actually believes that Warriors team wasn't historically special. I think something much deeper is happening. Kevin Durant has spent nearly a decade responding to the same criticism, that he joined Golden State because he needed an already built championship machine. 10 years later, 2 championships, to finals MVPs, and one of the greatest careers basketball has ever seen, that criticism still seems to bother him. And maybe that's why he keeps revisiting the past. Because every time Durant tries to explain why his decision was justified, he has to explain why the Warriors were so special. And if the Warriors were truly that special, then the criticism becomes harder to escape. To make his decision look less controversial, the team has to become less impressive. Steph has to become less historic. Klay has to become just a 22-point scorer. Draymond has to become just a 14-point scorer. And that's the irony of the entire situation. Those 3 players never needed to prove anything to Kevin Durant. They already built the foundation. Durant joined them, became the final piece, and helped turn an incredible team into something almost impossible to beat. That isn't an insult to Durant. It's actually one of the strongest statements you can make about his greatness. He was the superstar who took an already dominant team and made it nearly unstoppable. So maybe the real question isn't whether the Sixers are better than those Warriors. Maybe it's why Kevin Durant still feels the need to convince everyone that the Warriors weren't as good as they actually were. Because after everything he's accomplished, that's the one argument he still seems unable to walk away from.